Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is Doug Preston, a fabulous author with a fabulous new book. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's great to be here.
Well, you have written, 35 books by yourself and also with your partner, Lincoln Child, and you have a series about Aloysius Pendergrast.
That's right, a detective.
A detective, and they're extraordinary books, and people just can't wait. They're pre-ordered when they come out. And another book that's been pre-ordered a lot that just came out January 3rd, 2017, is your new book, The Lost City of the Monkey God. Now, this is a rip snorter. You've been famous for your nonfiction as well as your fiction. One book that I really want to recommend to people is The Monster of Florence, a true life adventure you had when you went to Italy to write a book. Can you just say in a sentence or two what happened when you were there?
Well, it's about a horrible serial killer known as the Monster of Florence who murdered young lovers in the Tuscan hills and was never caught. And I wrote that book with an Italian journalist, and unfortunately we both fell into the story and were accused by the police of obstruction of justice, and Mario was even arrested for murder. So it was very exciting while it lasted.
Well, and also you had to get out of the country right away because Amanda Knox fell victim to this justice system. So you were advised, I think Mario advised you to just leave and we'll take care of all your stuff.
That's right. And in fact, the same prosecutor in the Monster of Florence case was also the prosecutor in the Amanda Knox case. An abusive prosecutor, I'm afraid. But everything turned out well.
Good. And things turned out very interesting in this nonfiction book. Your real life is so closely tied to your nonfiction. So give me a little history about the lost city of the monkey god. Who found it? How long ago did you go there? How many expeditions have you had? Who sponsored it? All of that.
Well, it's incredible. You wouldn't think that in the 21st century you could actually still find a lost city somewhere on Earth. But that's exactly what happened, and that's what the book's about. For 500 years, there have been legends of a Ciudad Blanca, or a white city, or lost city of the monkey god, somewhere in the mountains of Honduras, these really rugged mountains covered with jungle. And about 20 years ago, a guy named Steve Elkins became obsessed with finding this white city. And in 2012, his efforts came to fruition, and I was on that expedition. It was incredible. He cost $1 million. They brought a very sophisticated plane down from the University of Houston, which had a LiDAR machine on board, which is a very high technology system which can actually see through the jungle canopy to what lies on the ground beneath. And they mapped 3 unexplored valleys in these mountains of Honduras, and to everyone's astonishment, they found a lost city.
Well, this taps into the passion that Americans and Brits too, because the geographic societies from the turn of the century, it taps into the Hiram Bingham finding Machu Picchu and Stevens finding the Coban site, also in Honduras, and Howard Carter and King Tut's tomb. I mean, people are just passionate about this, and for it to be really happening now is extraordinary. And you write about it in this book. I just want to quote our friend Hampton Sides, who is a wonderful best-selling author, wrote A Blood and Thunder and In the Kingdom of Ice. He said, Douglas Preston is one of the most adventurous figures in American letters today. Inured to personal danger, braving venomous snakes and lethal pathogens, he somehow gets it all: the science, the history, the intrigues, the obsessive characters, the electric moment of discovery, and the haunted cries of a once powerful civilization. Preston's marvelous story is made all the more potent by the astonishing fact that from the beginning to the end, it happens to be true.
Well, I have to thank Hampton for those very kind words. It is true, and It's extraordinary. It's the greatest experience of my life. I mean, more than the Monster of Florence or anything else, to be on this expedition, to actually be able to be the first human beings into this valley and to explore this lost city since it was abandoned 500 years ago.
Well, let's give people a little idea, first of all, of where it is. Would you show us your map of Honduras,
Sure.
Central America?
Well, this is Honduras, and this big green area here is a very remote mountainous region. Well, there's the Mosquito Coast here, and there are mountains in the center. And where I've drawn the circle here is the location of the lost city. It's in the center of these mountains. And here's the capital, Tegucigalpa, you can see for reference. But if you go to Google Earth, you can actually see the valley that we explored. It's kind of kidney-shaped, and it's right in the center of this circle. And in fact, if you look through Google Earth, you'll see a number of valleys in these mountains, very rugged mountains, some of them over a mile high. And these interior valleys are still unexplored. Many of them still scientifically unexplored. They're among the last scientifically unexplored places on the surface of the Earth.
And one of the ways you get around the rivers are the most navigable feature because I think you said the rainforest is so dense that many people with machetes hacking away can get how many miles in a day?
Well, a
10-hour day.
A 10-hour day, really working hard with experienced people with machetes can make 2 to 3 miles in a brutal day.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the jungle here is teeming with deadly poisonous snakes and jaguars and all kinds of things. Much safer to walk in the river. The rivers are actually the highways of this area.
So here you are, you with Chris, your GPS guy, Chris Fisher.
Yeah.
Right? Or is this Steve? This is Chris.
That's Chris. That's
Yeah.
the chief archaeologist of the expedition, Chris Fisher, who's a professor at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. Great guy. And that's me in front, just trudging our way through the river.
So here, this picture is astonishing to me. This picture of Chris in the middle of an impenetrable jungle is actually the middle of the central plaza of the lost city. But how would you know it if he didn't have his GPS there?
It's incredible. I mean, look at that picture. That's some of the thickest jungle in the world. If you were to put that jungle down in Times Square and put someone in the middle of it, they would have no idea they were surrounded by tall buildings. And that's the same here. You know, there's a pyramid there. There are great earthworks. There are all kinds of terracing and modifications to the landscape, and you can't see any of it because the jungle is just so thick.
So the first thing that you saw, this is a skull of a jaguar, like a werewolf, like a were-jaguar, because a lot of the shamans would transform into another animal. It's part of the shamanic magic. And so this is the first thing that you saw.
Well, it was. We found some altar stones and we saw a lot of, kind of ordinary stuff. And then someone said, we were walking through, it was pouring rain. Somebody said, hey, there's some weird stones over here. So we all rushed over, and the first thing I saw was what you're looking at here. That's a jaguar, which is carved onto a throne, a stone throne. They call them matatis, but they're not really matatis. They're actually quite a bit larger.
And you can see his little ears and his mouth.
Yeah, he's snarling, and it's actually a weird jaguar in the sense that it represents a shaman who's been transformed into a spiritual state of a jaguar. And you may have noticed also that it looks like he's wearing a bit of a helmet. Mm-hmm. And it's possible that this figure was connected to the Mesoamerican ball game, which was played by these people, which was that sacred and very violent sport where sometimes the losers lost their heads.
Here is not the same jaguar? Or another
That's
jaguar?
the same one. That's exactly the same one. Cleaned up. And you can see it's a seat probably for a priest or a shaman who would go into a transformed spiritual state. And this is all hypothetical, but this is what archaeologists believe, to tap into the spirit of the jaguar, which was, of course, a very powerful animal in the jungle. And in fact, this valley was thick with jaguars. In fact, the animals in this valley had appeared never to have seen people before. They wandered about unafraid. And in the middle of the night, the jaguars would sometimes come through camp purring and rumbling, this really scary sound, while we all cowered in our sleeping bags.
So this place where you found all of these objects, they were arranged with this vulture sculpture in the middle, right?
That's right. This is a great mystery. All these, 52 sculptures, just the tops of them were appearing above the ground, and they'd been placed at the base of this large earthen pyramid as some kind of offering, it appeared. And when it was excavated, the archaeologists found not 52 sculptures, but found over 500 of them, all carefully arranged around this figure of a vulture. And the question came up is, why did people leave these things here? And also that many of them were ritually broken. Why were they broken? And it turns out, well, the theory is that the inhabitants, when they left this city, after a series of calamities struck the city probably around 1500, they brought all their most precious objects to the base of this pyramid. They broke them ritually to release their spirits, and then just walked away. And these broken objects just lay there in the jungle for 500 years until the next human beings came by, and that was us.
And so these objects are, we try to read the symbolism to them, but certainly the vulture as a creature that feeds on death would be a figure of transformation, and again, another shamanic magical animal that the shaman could turn into, and just maybe showing that this is death now and transformation later. But it makes you wonder, the pressing question is, why did they leave?
Well, that's exactly right. The vulture as it symbolizes the transition from the earthly plane to the spiritual plane, and also symbolizes, as you just said, the transition between from life to death. And the vulture was a great symbol for the Maya as well as these people. Well, the theory is, and it's a very tragic one, is that this city was struck by probably devastating European epidemics of disease, probably measles and smallpox. Even though these people were nowhere near the contact zone, they never saw the Spanish. The Spanish never got into this part of Honduras. In fact, this area was completely remote until we got there. But European pathogens did burn way ahead of European contact, and probably it's documented very carefully that something like 90% of the indigenous people of Honduras died of European disease between 1518 and 1550, and it was probably these terrible diseases that swept through this unknown city, and the survivors, the 10% survivors, simply got up and walked away after leaving their precious possessions behind.
You did mention that, for example, in the Black Plague in Europe, between maybe 30 and 60% were killed of a culture, a city, a civilization. But when 90% is destroyed, I guess they could just leave their last offering saying maybe this didn't work and go away. But you had said through slave trading and through just goods trading, the pathogens were carried in, even if the Europeans that brought them weren't there.
That's right. And that's something I think people don't realize, is that when the Europeans first arrived in the New World, the pathogens they brought burned way, way ahead of European contact in many areas. So that often European explorers would move into a region, explore it for the first time any Europeans had seen it, and they'd find devastation. They'd find whole villages abandoned, the houses full of rotting corpses covered with pustules. And it's a terrifying thing. I mean, a 90% mortality rate doesn't just destroy people, it also destroys cultures, it destroys languages, music, dance. It absolutely destroys entire civilizations. And this great ancient civilization of the Mosquitia rainforest that covered 10,000 square miles was laid low by European disease and collapsed. And the whole area returned to jungle. And, the descendants of those people still live in Honduras today, but the culture no longer, the ancient culture that they were, created in the jungle no longer exists.
Well, we're speaking today with Doug Preston, about his new thrilling nonfiction book, the lost city of the monkey god. And I want to come back to what you're saying about the wave of contagion, because really the whole New World, it's been called actually the old world diseases, because the New World people were not ready for them, spread like crazy, and from Tierra del Fuego to Alaska, and from Mexico to French Canada, it just spread like wildfire, these diseases.
They did. I mean, this is a very controversial subject we're talking about now, because there's been a lot of arguing among archaeologists as to, well, what was the mortality rate. The mortality rate in Honduras is very well documented. The Spanish were in Honduras right from the beginning. In fact, the first mainland landing that Columbus made in Central America was in Honduras. So clearly 90% of the Honduran population were laid low, and probably 90% of the rest of the New World. It was the greatest catastrophe in the history of the human race.
And you call it an inferno of contagion that crossed the whole New World.
It was. It's interesting, when the human populations were separated, when human beings first came into the New World, maybe 15 or 20,000 years ago, everyone lived as hunter-gatherers. There were no cities. There were no dense population centers. But then in Europe and in Africa and also in Asia, very large cities grew up, and livestock, people began keeping livestock, and pathogens from livestock jumped into the human populations, and there were devastating pandemics all over Europe, which killed millions of people. The New World did not have those pandemics. They never had a chance to develop resistance to these diseases, what they call crowd diseases. So when the Old World and the New had their inevitable meeting, it was the New World that was absolutely devastated by these diseases, and not the Old World. Old World people did not die of New World diseases, or at least not many did. There were some New World diseases that caused problems, but mostly it was just the disease going in one direction, from the Old World to the New.
And we'll get to how it is now turning back, New World diseases affecting Old World people. But you have in this book, and in a recent article you had this week in the New Yorker, just a little bit of the Native American point of view from a Mayan Indian, an eyewitness to this. And I'll just read it. It's very short. This quote is this: "There was then no sickness. They had no aching bones. They then had no high fever. They then had no smallpox, no stomach pains, no consumption. At that time the people stood erect. But then the Tueles, the foreigners, arrived, and everything fell apart. They brought fear, and they came to wither the flowers." That's a poignant and tragic.
It's very tragic.
Poetic image. Yeah.
But we have so few voices of the victims of this tremendous contagion, and that's one of them. It's very powerful to hear that. I mean, one can talk about, who's to blame. Well, the Europeans were to blame in their conquest, but this pathogen, this terrible, inferno of disease would have happened regardless. Even if the New World mariners had discovered the Old World, it still would have happened.
Yeah. And also, if an Asian explorer had come, they were also used to these diseases and carried them because they'd had a lot of cross-cultural contact. You yourself, alas, fell victim to one of these New World diseases, and I want to show a little bit of footage of you in the jungle and some of the adventures you went through. And then we'll want to talk about. So let's just take a minute and look at some clips. This is you walking in the jungle, you escaping a mud hole. You have to tell us what that is. And you riding feverishly at night, looking like a character out of Rambo. But let's just take a minute and look at that.
Well, the first one of me walking through the jungle, you can see how thick the jungle is. And the people who are clearing our path with machetes have Dayglo tape on their machetes because they're slashing away, and sometimes so close to each other that you have to be able to see the blades of your partner's machete, that is a very, you don't want to, cut someone's arm off as you proceed. But I think it gives you a sense of just how absolutely thick this jungle is. I mean, it's 10 feet of rain a year, and it's almost impenetrable. You go 5 feet and you are in a panic. You think you're lost.
And what is a quick mud?
Well, there's these mud holes where it's literally, it's like something out of a Hollywood B movie. You get into this quick mud, and you're just sucked down, and you have to get through it. You have to get out of it quickly. We almost lost our anthropologist, Alicia Gonzalez, who actually started to go down and had to be pulled out. It was pretty scary. She was actually quite calm. She stood there saying, "I'm going down. I really am going down. I'm not kidding. I am going down." Yeah. And the soldiers had to rush in and just haul her out, and it was quite a struggle.
So it's like quicksand, but wetter and more grabbed onto you tighter.
Exactly. It's just like really liquid mud. It's just awful. It's everywhere, and you have to go through it. You can't get around it. There are these rivulets of it.
And then the last little bit of the clip of you riding at night. So you macheted and hiked and explored all day, and then at night was your only time to make your notes.
I did, yeah. I kept notes. It was raining most of the time, so I was carefully guarding my notebook from the water, very carefully sealed it up, and I'd take it out under a tarp and write feverishly while the sandflies collected around me. And I, at the time, didn't realize that they were the most dangerous thing of all.
Exactly. So you had jaguars, you had fertilent snakes that could kill you in an instant, but the most dangerous thing was the sandflies, from which you contracted a parasitic disease called
mucosal leishmaniasis. In fact, 2/3 of the expedition got the disease, including the Hondurans with us and the soldiers and even some of the indigenous people with us. This valley was a hot zone of absolute virulence. And I mean, even we were only there for 9 days, and we came out with this incurable and sometimes deadly tropical disease
called white leprosy. And I don't want you to have to describe it, but it is horrific, and parts of your face or wherever you're infected can just fall off.
Well, it attacks your nose and your lips, and eventually your entire face falls off, and the bones of your teeth cave in. If you really want to be grossed out, you can go on Google and Google the images, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Don't do it. But we're almost out of time, and you have presented some cutting-edge research about the relationship of leishmaniasis now with HIV and with global warming, how these diseases like Zika, like dengue fever, and leishmaniasis are coming across our southern border and are now found in Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah, there was an outbreak very recently in the Texas Dallas suburbs and also along the Oklahoma-Arkansas border, in which a number of people got leishmaniasis, including a little girl and a cat in the same household. This disease, by the way, affects a lot of animals and people. It's not just restricted to people.
But you used to have a kind of sweetheart relationship or symbiotic relationship with wood rats and sandflies.
Exactly.
Now we've got cats and dogs.
Well, there have been outbreaks of deadly leishmaniasis in dog kennels, and that disease can be transmitted to humans by the bite of a sandfly. So there was a study done that said that with the best case estimate of global warming, best case, not worst case, that by the year 2080, leishmaniasis would have crossed the southeast United States and would already be working its way into Canada. So we're looking at 200 million people being potentially exposed to this disease.
Now, the last great pandemic was the Spanish influenza. Killed how many millions?
It killed 100 million people worldwide.
And now with the ease of air travel and people going off adventuring in all these places that were previously untouched, the possibility for the transmission of a pandemic virus or bacteria is stronger. But we have to give the New Mexicans a little ray of hope here.
Yes, New Mexico is too high for the sandfly. It does not live above 3,000 feet.
Good.
So we are protected.
So this is so provocative because you've taken it, especially with its relationship to HIV, which kind of makes each other, they empower each other. It's kind of a super host for HIV. And so, and that a lot of the needles of intravenous drug users in Spain, most of them had leishmaniasis.
Yes, that's right. Leishmaniasis and HIV are not dissimilar diseases. Leishmaniasis hijacks the body's immune system and its white blood cells to reproduce. And so an HIV leishmaniasis co-infection is a completely new disease, which is extremely dangerous and almost always fatal. And the leishmaniasis makes the drugs that are normally used to treat HIV, it renders them much less effective. And it also, so we're seeing in Southern Europe, especially in Spain, leishmaniasis HIV co-infections spreading rapidly. Terrifying. And that form of leishmaniasis is 100% fatal if not treated. And of course, the HIV drug users don't often, get good medical treatment.
So what you have done in this book is really remarkable. It is a thrilling archaeological adventure and discovery of lost cities, and the step-by-step as each piece is discovered. And the president of Honduras has been so proud that you found this lost city in his country. He's invited you down there. And then you have all the science, and then the whole history of cross-cultural communications between First World and Third World. It goes on and on. Your James Patterson, a much beloved writer, had said, not only is your book fast-paced and riveting, but it's also important. We mustn't repeat the cataclysmic mistakes of the past. Ironically, as The Lost City illustrates, that's exactly what our short-sighted civilization is doing right now. So you've got the thrill and the adventure and a really wise alert, a warning to pay attention to the progress of civilizations and the dance of disease between worlds. You've done a wonderful job.
Well, thank you very much.
And our guest today is Doug Preston, The Lost City, the Monkey God. You won't be able to put it down. So thank you for being our guest today. We'll see you after you go to Honduras.
Well, it's great to be here.
Yes, it's my pleasure. And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.